So I've sat down to film my video, and obviously as I've sat down, a guy has actually started using a chainsaw next door. So let's get into it. Hopefully that's not too violent of a sound. I have put my AirPods in, so hopefully I can filter some of that out. I want to talk to you today about some of the biggest misconceptions in addiction. When I was going through the throes of addiction myself with substance use and also with my key addiction, which was bulimia, I often felt quite perturbed and misunderstood when I would share these things with people. And I didn't really like having the discussion a lot of the time because I just did not feel like people understood what I was going through. And oftentimes when I would open up, I would feel injured because I feel insulted, like as if they didn't understand certain things about me, and they would place me in certain categories. I was like, oh, okay, you're an addict, which must mean this, and I just did not like it at all, even though I was educating myself more on addiction at the time. And that is going to be a key thing for you if you're going through addiction, or you have a loved one who's in the throes of addiction. Education is really crucial. There is no one size fits all technique. There is no thing like AA or NA or some spiritual technique or some meditation or whatever. There is no one thing. And I think that we do desperately want to feel like there's going to be some cure-all that helps us with addiction. But the truth is, guys, it just does not work like that. If it's a deep addiction that we're dealing with, there's a lot of moving parts. So it's really our responsibility to educate ourselves more on this and to keep update with what's really going on in this field, because some of the advancements over the last decade or so in the field of addiction have just been remarkable, with the incredible work of people like Dr. Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, and even like Richard Schwartz I've been reading a lot of recently. There is some amazing advancements being made. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the 3 biggest misconceptions around addiction. So the first misconception that we have is that addiction should be, or even could be, solved with willpower alone. That willpower is somehow enough to ameliorate a deep addiction inside of you. And this is simply so untrue. Once you start to actually look into what's the root cause of some of your addictions, and you start to actually understand the best information about this, you start to recognize how ridiculous and even, I dare say, insulting it is to actually assume that willpower alone is enough to work with these deep addictions. These addictions have roots in trauma that we're usually not even conscious of. It's not a matter of just trimming the branches and making sure that we behave differently so our dopamine resets with addiction. That might be the outward cause, but we're not looking to just trim the branch, because then our addiction is just going to reassume into a different shape somehow. What we're looking to do is work more at the root level. And to do that, we need to understand the actual needs that a human being has when they come into this world. When a human being is born and we come into this world, we have certain needs for safety, love, security, playfulness, intimacy with our parental figures, our caregivers, our peers. And if we're deprived of those things, whether it's on a dense level or a subtle level, or even, God forbid, we're actually physically, emotionally abused on top of that, and we're dealing with and we're absorbing all of that stress, every single stressor that your parents dealt with, that your peers dealt with, that essentially you pick up even in school. Like, we like to think, sometimes I think we think that trauma is only this really like dense thing that happens, but it's just simply not the case. A lot of trauma can be very subtle. Some of the people I know who have some of the worst emotional problems I've ever dealt with, I've never actually, like, some of the people I really have seen have dreadful emotional problems. They are people who are actually, like, they were never physically abused. They might not have even been yelled at that much, but it's just the actual atmosphere. The actual atmosphere of their family home, for example, was so toxic that it had this impact. And we can't just expect someone to willpower their way through this when it gets lodged within us at a deep level. We have to understand the human needs spectrum. We have to understand that if we don't have a more appropriate outlet and we don't have a safe way of expressing this emotion that gets locked in us, it gets locked in there, guys, and it's very difficult to work with, and it can prevent us from moving forward in our life. We can't just bury it and get on with stuff. And our world is often not very accommodating to this because we have this need to do everything, get everything done, be the top of the pack culture. Where some of us are dealing with deep trauma, and it's completely inevitable that we're going to find outlets for actually numbing this pain and for meeting those needs that we actually never had met earlier on, right? So that's the first addiction. That addiction can be solved with willpower alone. This is absolutely ludicrous. And if you don't believe me on that, you're, again, for every point here, and this is, these points are by no means an exhaustive list. Do your own research. Go look into where the cutting edge of addiction and trauma actually is right now, and then recognize that the stigmas that we've held here for such a long time are not helpful for us anymore. We need to move on. Addiction cannot and will not ever be solved sheerly with willpower alone. I want you to understand that. So that's the first point. The second misconception, or the second mistake that I see in addiction a lot of the time, is the idea that the addiction itself is the problem, like the behavior pattern. Like, for example, if we have a substance addiction, we might look at the substance use as if it was actually the problem in itself, which is not the case. The substance use, as I've just mentioned before, the substance use is merely an outward manifestation. It's a symptom. These addictions we have, whether it's that you can't get off your phone, or whether you're putting yourself in these risky situations because maybe you're a sex and intimacy addict. Maybe it is actually substances you're addicted to. Maybe like me, you were bulimic for many years. Whatever it is, these are not the root causes themselves, and we put so much emphasis on how do I solve this problem. But when it comes down to it, that is just the symptom. The addiction is merely the symptom. Again, it is the spectrum of needs underneath. It is the fact that we were often unsafe when we were raised, and there is more to safety than just having a roof over your head and a shirt on your back. There's emotional safety, there's acceptance, there's love, there's care, there's physical touch, intimacy, proximity. There's a lot that goes into our sense of well-being and what goes into a person being well, further than the formative years. So we need to stop looking at the addiction itself as like something to solve, like just this outward problem that we need to ameliorate, and then we can move on and have a good life. Trust me, it doesn't work. Even sometimes we can, overcome an addiction for a few months, even years for some people, and they relapse, they go back, and it's because deep down they are still depressing. Like, what is it? When I use the word depress, what do I mean? To depress, like the root of the word depress literally means down. It means to push down. That is a depression, right? We have this, I'm not necessarily talking about clinical depression. I'm talking about that we have this depression, we have this tendency to push these things down. And that's what this mindset of feeling like addiction is actually the problem itself that we need to solve, and rather than the symptom. That's how this can manifest sometimes. We feel like we need to just push down the problem. No, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not taking this drug anymore. I'm not going to binge eat anymore. No, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done. And we try to use, it's like 1 and 2. We try to use willpower to solve the problem, and we get nowhere, right? How many times does this happen? And then the problem is, a lot of the content we see a lot of the time is people saying, here's how to solve your addiction, but we don't want to take the long road to actually deeply understand ourselves, or to understand our trauma, understand what might actually be the root cause of some of these addictions. And because of that, we end up in a rather, what feels like an endless cycle. So I want you guys to understand, again, that it is just not practical to just place addiction as the problem itself. Addiction is a symptom of the underlying problems. I want you to understand that. The third misconception that I see around addiction, the third mistake that I think we make quite easily, is assuming that addiction is only relegated to a certain category of people, whether that be a class, an age group, some people could even go as far as to think that addiction is basically like a race thing, and this is just not true. Addiction affects everyone. Yes, I mean, you can find research to suggest that, yes, like substance addiction, for example, is a more common thing in lower socioeconomic class. Yes, of course, this is true. Of course, this is. And we're not going to go into all the reasons behind that right now, right? We're just giving you these free things. We're going to be making a lot more content about this. So subscribe if you're getting value from this, because we're just scratching the surface with this stuff. But generally speaking, addiction affects everyone. It does not only just affect a small group of people, right? A lot of people have a lot of money. A lot of people are even sometimes in like fairly loving, high quality relationships, but they still struggle with these addictions. Some of the outwardly most mentally healthy people I've known, like they have a lot of these like addictions. They have a lot of them. They can't get off their phone. They can't actually just sit by themselves without spamming content into them every night, right? They smoke chronically. They can't be by themselves. And again, we're not judging anyone for any of this stuff. These things are merely just symptoms. But there is this compulsive urge, because deep down within us, we are very uncomfortable. We do have this pain deep down. It's not as simple as just getting over the thing. And this is the same for everyone. This is ubiquitous. No matter how old you are, no matter what color you are, no matter how much money you have, this is ubiquitous. Addiction affects everyone. It might affect different social groups in different ways, sure, like I'm not denying that, but it affects everyone. And some of the people you meet who you would never think are actually like, wow, this guy is an addict. It's like you don't have a deep enough understanding of how addiction works. They can very well be an addict. I hope you guys got a bit of value out of these free things here. I'll be going into a lot more depth with this. So if you like this kind of content, if you got value out of this, if this was illuminating for you, subscribe. I really appreciate that. It helps me grow up the channel. Thank you so much for everyone who's leaving like wonderful feedback, and for all the subscriptions, and also just for the likes and the comments. Like, thank you for the support, guys. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to be making more content on this kind of thing. Hope that you got some value out of this. Hope that you're having a beautiful day. As I said, this is by no means an exhaustive list. So maybe I'll ask you, comment in the comment section down below, comment what misconceptions that you've actually faced with addiction. I'd like to hear what you've seen and what you've went through with addiction, where like it's just really frustrating, and you know that people just don't often understand this, because there's many more misconceptions. And obviously I've only went into a little bit of detail with these things. I've not spent like an hour, because I could spend easily an hour or two on each point here, just going over some of these misconceptions. But right now the point is to just give you this information. Anyway, I hope you're having a beautiful day. That's me.